Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. I am thrilled to announce the release of Russ Croman's BlurXTerminator, a new deconvolution process that's available exclusively for the PixInsight platform. This new approach to deconvolution offers a universe of possibilities, and I look forward in this video to showing you its potential. Now it's available as a 30-day free trial, so you can check it out and see how it works, though I think that by the end of this video you'll have a very good idea. Now down in the description below you'll see a link that goes directly to Russ's site where you can learn more about the software and of course purchase it there. As far as this video is concerned, this was done just a few days prior to the imminent release of the software. So first of all the mistakes in this video are mine. It's, as happens when there's a first release, not everything is perfect, but I did the best that I could. And I wanted to create this comprehensive look for you so that you could instantly start using the software and improve your images right away. That does take a little bit of effort, so I ask for your support. Please comment down below, of course, but join the channel, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and consider really becoming a member of Atom Block Studios. There you'll find a wealth of information, all kinds of instructional video, many hundreds of them, about astrophotography that are of this kind of quality. It's only so often, rarely, that things come along that can make you say, wow, this is one of those things that does it. So I hope you enjoy the video and have a great time. I really do think that BlurXTerminator is a revolution in our ability to sharpen astronomical images. Deconvolution has always been a challenge to reach somehow a sharper image that looks like you didn't even try to do it. BlurXTerminator has the capability to do what I have always imagined deconvolution being like. It minimizes many of the issues dealing with artifacts and does so in a few straightforward adjustments. I look forward to showing you the features and benefits of BlurXTerminator, so let's go. Anyone that has seen my videos before knows that I always take time out to explain things, whether it be a technique, a software process, whatever it might be. Here, just let me spend just a little moment to explain and put into context deconvolution as it is traditionally done with what is being done now with BlurXTerminator. To do that, you need to appreciate what a point spread function is. When we observe stars or any source of light very far away in the universe, they are literal infinitesimal little sources of light, little spots of light on the sky. And when our telescopes, with our instrumentation, focus that information onto the image plane, onto our sensors, we do not get a tiny little dot of light, infinitesimally small. But we get instead this spread or smear of light on our detector. Now you can minimize how large that point spread function is by putting your telescope in space, and then you're limited only by the diffraction limit, the wavelength of light that you're observing at, and how it is diffracted by the elements of your optical system. That's determined in main by a large degree by the size of your mirror. And then the sampling, which is the number of pixels, how big or small they are, on your sensor itself. That's it. You can get the very best possible circumstance by getting the largest mirror, the smallest sampling, and then getting the very smallest well-formed point spread functions. We don't have that though, not when we observe from the ground. Our little mountains, what we're looking at here on the left, is the intensity plot in X and Y, so the intensity is in the vertical direction here. It looks like a little mountain of light. And this might be the space-like view, if you will, the ideal form, a very pretty mountain. However, it's affected by the seeing, by the atmospheric dispersion. It's distorted by optical aberrations, guiding errors, chromatic issues, scattered light. All of this stuff takes this very nice mountain and messes it up. Now I've exaggerated that here, I kind of destroyed our point spread function, but I just want to indicate that these things are really going to distort and morph it. If you look at the top left, this is an image from HST before it was corrected. It had an optical flaw. The mirrors were not in the correct shape position. And so you get this kind of result. That is not one of those nice point spread functions. But the thing about that point spread function, it is a function. It is literally doing the same thing every time. If you could determine what that function was, you could undo it and retrieve the original very nice mountain that existed before. So that's the idea behind deconvolution. When you have a convolution of functions, you are blending them together to make in our case, messier and not as useful thing. If you can untangle that, unmix those functions, and get back to restoring the original point spread function, the best that your system could do, that is what sharpening and deconvolution is all about. Now, PSFs, point spread functions, are found throughout PixInsight. You find them everywhere. Dynamic PSF. I've explained in some other videos all about weighting schemes and normalization. That takes advantage of the stellar PSF, the measurements of these PSFs in order to calculate all kinds of things. To detect them is an important thing to do in order to do astrometry and compare the PSFs, literally the sources in your image, to, say, other catalogs. And that leads to the ability to do wonderful things. Another recent video that I've highlighted is the spectrophotometric color calibration process. All of this happens because of point spread function analysis within PixInsight. Here are some pretty pictures, colorful versions again of those PSF intensity plots. And you can see one of the plots here is not perfect. It's possible then, in a deconvolution type algorithm, to correct for misshapen kind of point spread functions, but BlurXTerminator takes this to another level. And boy, I look forward to showing you what that looks like. Now, deconvolution as an exercise in astronomical image processing has some very particular rules. Rules that will hopefully lead to a successful outcome. But these rules have not changed, not in the case of BlurXTerminator or any deconvolution algorithm. It's all the same in the sense that, number one, you don't want to touch the PSF. As I've described, it encodes the information that you need in order to deconvolve it and get back to that much better form, which is going to result, obviously, in sharper images with fewer artifacts. So they're delicate. You want to do deconvolution, and this is true again for BlurXTerminator, when the data is in its linear state. In the cases that I'm going to be demonstrating, it's basically right after you have created your RGB image. I will have, for example, already applied DBE, that's okay, and then done a color correction, that's okay. But it's at that point that I really want to consider doing the deconvolution before I do anything else, such as noise reduction. No, we don't want to change the PSFs by doing any little noise reduction to the image. We can do that later. One of the nice things about BlurXTerminator, as you'll see in some of the differences compared to a traditional deconvolution algorithm, is that it understands or takes into account the background, what is basically the noise floor, in a way that is different than what a traditional algorithm might do. So it's always true, of course, that for any of these kind of sharpening routines, you need to have high signal to noise. If it's just noisy stuff, there's nothing that any of these algorithms have. They just don't have the information to work on. Noise is an uncertainty, and so the greater the noise, the more uncertain the result, the more artifacts that you're going to get, and so on. Good sampling is also important. Obviously, we're talking about sharpening an image. If the images are already too big, it might not be your ability to sharpen them if they're totally oversampled, for example. I'll be demonstrating that, as well as very undersampled. There isn't going to be a lot of sharpening that'll occur because you're already at kind of the smallest scales. However, one of the interesting benefits to BlurXTerminator is that it comes along with other kinds of modifications to the PSF, corrective modifications, even though it's not a sharpening one, that could still be really beneficial. And I look forward to showing you that as well. So quality input is always important. And obviously, this is not the kind of thing that you're going to run some other sharpening routine and then run BlurXTerminator, or run BlurXTerminator twice, or anything like that. So no double decon. So here's a field of view you might not recognize. It's a small portion of a much larger field that contains the iconic Pillars of Creation, part of the Eagle Nebula. This is an example, some data that I'd like to just start working with so I can give you a sense, a little bit of a taste of how BlurXTerminator works. So here we are with the image. As I mentioned before, the images I'm going to be showing you, a vast majority of them, are not fully processed because the sharpening, the using BlurXTerminator, it happens at that point after you have a color image, an RGB image that has been color corrected and so on, but not when you've fully processed everything. I will actually show you some of those examples as well, but that's much harder to do, where you would actually process the image without using BlurXTerminator all the way to the end, with all of the adjustments that you make, and then do another one that has BlurXTerminator included. I'm going to show you a few of those examples, but most of the examples are not of that type. Because that's kind of hard to do, right? But this also leads to another idea that's very important. When you use BlurXTerminator, you, unfortunately, as much as you're going to want to, and I want to, believe me, a lot of images I want to go back to, you can't just take your final images and apply BlurXTerminator to them and expect the best results. It needs to be done in this linear state. So you need to go back and do some reprocessing to be able to achieve a potentially better result by using BXT. So this example here is just been barely processed, just a single step or so, just so I can increase the contrast and the saturation, right after using BlurXTerminator. So all I'm going to do is just blink the two images. This is the before for the Pillars of Creation, and this is after. So I've made this a relatively dramatic degree. You don't need to go this far. In terms of the reduction of stars or the increase of the sharpening of the nebula. This is a controllable element of the tool, but I just wanted to make it really dramatic here as to what is possible. This kind of resolution that you're seeing in this image, to be able to see the individual little droplets, the little star-forming regions and all of that stuff, is really a cool thing to be able to do. So while I'm here, let me just do a few more before and after. You'll be able, of course, to do this with your own images and be able to see all of these wonderful things that happen. It's something else. There's something to be said about when you look at images that you take, you apply a process, and then in some way you say, wow, when the process, shows you a result. This is one of those things. And you always look for the opportunities to use something that gives you that feeling. This is certainly one of those tools that really does that kind of job. Any deconvolution, and BlurXTerminator is no exception. All of the interesting stuff happens at relatively small scales, the scale sizes of, say, stars, or not much larger than a star size in your image. So if you're the kind of astrophotographer that displays images only at the size of a screen, like what people would look at on their monitor when they visit your website or something like that, BXT, almost any deconvolution algorithm, it's not going to be that big a change, because these changes you need to zoom in a little bit more to be able to see at that kind of zoomed out scale. And there are a lot of astrophotographers that do this. They process their images only to be shown at this kind of zoomed out screen-sized scale. This isn't going to make a dramatic difference. You will certainly see some benefit. You'll see the stars are smaller and so on, but only when you zoom in can you really start to see it. So just a bit of a commentary on the screen astrophotographers. I come from kind of a different place, I guess. One of the things that I do in my astrophotography is I always show my work. I try to make my images look good. Even if you zoom into maybe 200% or something like that, they should look reasonable and something like you would expect. If you zoom into an image at 100% or more and it falls apart, I think that more work could be done to make those images more complete and coherent. BlurXTerminator is a part of that. It's a part of this workflow which enables this kind of rendering and information content at the very smallest scales of our images, and you just can't take advantage of that if you're never displaying that information in the first place. Now, there are other benefits to BlurXTerminator that are different than, say, a traditional deconvolution algorithm would give you. These benefits include corrective kind of modifications to the point spread function that ultimately you get from the tool. So it can correct for aberrations in the corners of images and make things look a little bit better there, which is great. And then the other thing to consider is that when you use a tool, and this again applies to most deconvolution algorithms, the artifacts are at the scale at which all the interesting activity is happening. So I know that there are sometimes concern, and this is a concern not only with a neural net-based deconvolution scheme, but even in regular deconvolution, the idea, traditional deconvolution, the idea that you're introducing artifacts because this is an ill-posed problem that when you try to reconstruct the image, is it really real information or not, and all of that. So I'm going to demonstrate where some of these artifacts or uncertainties live, and at the level of BlurXTerminator, I'll be able to show that you really got to zoom in quite a bit to start to see where things kind of break down. The breakdown only happens because you have a finite, limited amount of information that you can provide, BlurXTerminator in your data. That's why it's important to get as much data as you can, and then you'll be able to do more with it to reconstruct these better, sharper images. So now let's look at the user interface and kind of see a little bit about how to use it. The thing you want to do when you're looking at your image, when using BlurXTerminator, is you want to think about the image as two different components, like of stars and non-stars. This is synonymous with what is very popular today, where we separate the stars to work on the nebula independent of them and then put them back together. Well, this is based on a lot of the similar logic here, right? Russ has these other tools that are available. You have Star Exterminator, Noise Exterminator. They are all based on these very similar kind of training ideas. This is all astronomical data, after all. So we can think in those terms when using BlurXTerminator. And so we have sliders that reflect this differentiation. Now, concerning the sharpening of stars themselves, there are kind of two features or components of stars. You can think about the sizes of the stars and then an adjustment to the halos of stars. So point spread functions have this outer wings of the function, that is how much of that light gets sent out to go beyond what we kind of call the star when we look at an image. It's the fuzzy halo of light surrounding it. And the neural net, BlurXTerminator, has an understanding, and I put that in quotes, so don't quote me on that, but it can accommodate, because it has been trained through all of the data that's fed into it, what halos are all about. That's a part of this. And so when you change sharpen stars, you change those PSFs, you can also independently change how much the halo is being represented in that PSF or not. And I'll be demonstrating an example where that can be actually useful, not only to make it less, but also you could actually make it more. You can go the other way, which is really kind of cool because it offers another dimension of flexibility in working with BlurXTerminator and the sharpening routine. Now, non-star data, that is, nebula and galaxies, that sharpening may require a different kind of setting, and you can, number one, do a different amount of sharpening to the non-stellar components compared to the stars. So that's that differentiation. But the way that this tool works is that it looks locally throughout the image at where there are stars, and then it determines the PSFs from that point. If you have an image that is star poor, like some certain kinds of narrowband images, starless images, of course, themselves, you can specify what the seed PSF, what the ideal point spread function kind of size is, and then from that point, the routine, BlurXTerminator, will take it from there and do what's necessary. So I'll be showing some examples of what to look for when it's over-sharpening effectively, because that is not a determined value, and you need to help it out by giving it that number. The items that are at the bottom here for correct only, correct first, I'll indicate that those are just convenience operations. There's no other magic or ingredients that are involved there. It just means that you're going to be doing a certain slider. Like if you were to do correct only, you're not going to sharpen the stars, so you'd put the sharpened stars all the way to 0, and perhaps if you don't want to sharpen anything at all, you could put the non-stellar sharpening to 0, and then only the corrective effects on stars will occur within the image in terms of correcting those PSFs for the distortion that they may have. So let me show you some demonstrations of a few of the things that I've just mentioned here. The first is that I want to just talk about that screen scale for a moment. Here is an image where we are just zoomed out, right? Because the actual scale, if we do 1:1, is this big. But if we're zoomed out and we're going to fit it on someone's screen, and then we compare the two images, let me make sure that they are displayed exactly the same. They are. And we blink the two images, you're going to see, certainly there's going to be a change in the stars. The stars have been sharpened, and that made them smaller. So it has this natural de-emphasis of stars that occurs. And this is a thing that you can do using different kinds of methodologies. But this is a true deconvolution method of making the stars smaller here. And that helps. That helps. I don't know that you would use deconvolution to really control how many stars you're ultimately seeing. There's other methods of doing that, but you can see that as a change. However, at this scale where the cool activity is, I had set this to do kind of near maximum degree of sharpening of the nebulosity, but at this scale you couldn't tell. I mean, if I blink these two images, yeah, you could maybe stare at that and pretend you could see a big difference, but it's subtle, right? You would want to be displaying an image where this is important at a much more zoomed in level. So if we zoom in a bit more, we can see, some of these dark features and other things that are interesting in here. Let me match the two. Become sharper, obviously, and much more distinct. Notice the small details here in these clouds between the before image, where you can see the information is there, of course, but when we apply BlurXTerminator, it does some really cool stuff to all of this information, increasing the contrast, the sharpness of it, and improving the image quality ultimately. The other thing that I mentioned is that it is possible to set things in such a way where we can change the degree to which we see the halo of the sharpened stars. Just as an example, and I'm going to show you a much better way to think about this in a moment, but if I blink these two images, in this particular example, I've done it where I have minimized a little bit the halos around stars, and that scattered light that we see around them. Not only do the stars get smaller, but especially on the bright ones where the halo is larger, that kind of glow of light around them becomes greatly diminished. Let's look at this. Now this will be perhaps an extreme example because I wasn't that crazy about it. But you can see we minimize a bit of that halo around stars. So let's spend a moment and actually dive into that, actually use BlurXTerminator to do some interesting things for us here. I have an RGB image of M4, a globular star cluster. Now there's no nebulosity in here, just stars, but we can look at the stars. I've made a preview here where we can zoom into the preview, and then because it's a smaller image, we can more quickly modify this and see the changes that we're making. Now I'm going to go ahead and reset the tool. When you first get the program, you may need to go check or highlight the AI file there so that it loads its brains, and then you'll be ready to go. These are the default settings, which are very good, and we can just apply them just to see what happens, if nothing else, to the preview here. So here we are. Here is before and here is after. That's pretty good, right? Now this is the default setting. This is not maximally making the stars small. we can go all the way here to 0.5, where we can do the maximal amount of kind of star sharpening. The meaning of this and everything that I'll be describing is, of course, explained in excruciating detail here in the document. So I encourage you, here, read the documentation on BlurXTerminator. It describes everything and more of what I'm trying to touch on here in this video. So this would be the maximum amount of, and that is an amazing amount. Now this was taken with a relatively large telescope, right? So this data I took using a telescope on Mount Lemmon long ago, and you can see that this would have made it as if it were a night that was, like arc-second seeing or better is really what this would amount to being. And that was not, of course, what the original data looks like at all, where we're probably closer to 1.8 arc-seconds or worse in terms of the data. So a remarkable amount of sharpening, and in the case that this is actually stars, sharpening these things down is a kind of a cool thing to be able to do. But one of the interesting things about this is that you'll notice that by making the stars smaller, it also makes all of the stars that are kind of the brighter ones, it's more difficult to possibly perceive their colors. Now this has been color corrected initially, but I haven't increased the color contrast. Remember, this is just the RGB image as it comes out, and then of course later I'll make more of the contrast adjustments and potentially color adjustments as well. So, but even at this level, you can kind of see that, yeah, we have stars here, and we can still see their halos. We're not making them go away. If we wanted to make the halos of stars less, and for globular clusters, this might not be something that you want to do, we can do something along these lines. And I will compare this, just so you can see, I will do the same settings here with no adjustment to the halos, so you can blink the two and see the difference. So here we are. Here is the one. Let's be sure. I need to match these. So let's match this like that. There we go. So here is with the halo adjustment. You can see we've modified it. The star sharpening is the same. No difference in the amount that the stars have been sharpened, but notice that the halos change a little bit. Now, I wasn't very dramatic here when I did it, but they change a little bit. The cool thing about globular star clusters is you could actually go the other way if you wanted to. Instead of decreasing them, as I did here, I'll use the same sharpening, maximum sharpening, but I'll increase the halo. This isn't going to make the stars bigger, it makes their halos a little bit bigger. For small stars, it won't be much of an effect because the small stars don't have much of a halo. But the larger stars will take on a much greater halo here. So let's go ahead and run it. And that could be useful actually for globular clusters. This is a typical globular cluster problem where you want to sharpen the image, but at the same time show off some of these brighter stars. You want those to stand out. It gives the cluster a kind of sparkle. So the difference then, of course, being, let's match these two again. Here we have that. Can you see the adjustment? I'll zoom in a little bit more. Let's zoom in here. Between, we have a minor halo adjustment here, and that just makes these stars stand out a little bit more, where they would be much more difficult to stand out if we didn't have that halo adjustment, which is really kind of cool. So it solves a problem that isn't really about sharpening. It's a different kind of problem, but it's all part of the brains, if you will, of BlurXTerminator. Now, I've only had BlurXTerminator in my hands for a few days, so I haven't had the opportunity to reprocess many images and show you how including it in the workflow results in these different images at the end of the day. I did do a few, and so this isn't going to be, entirely processed, but it gets to the point of indicating differences in results. So I took this data, a while ago. In fact, this particular data set is one of the very first that I ever processed in PixInsight, if you can believe it. I mean, this would have been back in 2015 or something along those lines. And I'm embarrassed to show it. This is literally the worst image that I've ever kind of published or just made available. But for me, it was a first of PixInsight. So this is what I was able to do before, right? And it was my best ability, obviously, to try to do deconvolution and everything else. And this is what I'm getting over on the right today. So we will ignore this. I'll show you a better example where I did everything today, what I now know how to do without BlurXTerminator and with BlurXTerminator, so you can see those results as well. But I'm going to argue that this is a wonderful image of M4, and I would be very pleased to publish this. Most of its success, because of a globular cluster being all about stars, is due to the benefit and the control that I was able to take advantage of with BlurXTerminator. While we're on the note of globular star clusters, I'd like to show you another one. Now, this is an example of an extreme kind of observation. NGC 5139, you might recognize it to be Omega Centauri. I live in Arizona, and from my latitude, Omega Centauri does not get higher than 10 degrees above the horizon. This is a picture that this data that I've never published, because if you zoom in, you can see the problem. When you're looking through more than 5 atmospheres worth of air, and you have atmospheric dispersion, you'll notice these stars, not only are they fuzzy, but they look a little egg-like. All of that is due to the worst possible conditions that you could ask for, to look through all of our ocean of air and try to capture this image. In addition to that, I should add, I'm sure that I wasn't using the full aperture of the telescope, so it's probably only half aperture. Everything that you could possibly think, would make this a challenge occurred. And so I didn't think at the time that I took this data, again, it was a while ago, that I could produce what would be, anyone would look at the image and go, wow, that's compelling or interesting. I might as well take a picture of a globular cluster in the sky that I do have access to, and just be happy with the fact that I can see this particular cluster with my eyes, but not easily take a picture of it. Well, now there's this cool tool where we have BlurXTerminator, which can look at these crazy PSFs and the degree of blurring that we have here, and somehow make this a reasonable image. And that's what I'd like to show here. So here, for example, is the straight up RGB information. That's just straight RGB combined image, color corrected using now SPCC, right? So you can start to see that there are these differentiation of colors of stars in the cluster. But this is what it looks like before. Now I'm zoomed in a lot, 200%, so that you can really see this. And here is an application of BlurXTerminator. So here we have before, and now we have something that looks like, reasonable stars. Here's before, and here's after. 10 degrees above the horizon. So I had a problem, right? And BlurXTerminator kind of solved my problem, at least made it somewhat possible to show an image or to capture an image of something 10 degrees above the horizon. That's cool that you can throw data like that at BlurXTerminator and come out with something that kind of is sensible. So, this is what it looks like without any other processing. But at the end of the day, I tried to manipulate it a little bit more, and I got something, that looks like this. So, for 10 degrees above the horizon as viewed from Tucson, Arizona, that image of Omega Centauri, hey, that's not too terrible. I don't know of any pictures taken 10 degrees above our horizon that look this good of this cluster, right? So I would argue, again, because of BlurXTerminator, I was really able to realize this particular image where I had no hope to be able to do that before. So now, having shown you some BlurXTerminator action, let's do a comparison between what are basically traditional deconvolution schemes compared to BlurXTerminator. So traditionally, and this applies kind of across the board, though I'll mention some PixInsight things, PSFs are the same across the image plane, where with BlurXTerminator, you're assessing these PSFs as you go along. And that idea of local PSF kind of analysis, or computation in this sense, is something that actually the developers of PixInsight would be very much happy and in line with, because many different algorithms in PixInsight take advantage of this idea. Local normalization, for example, is one of them. So the idea behind a local analysis within an image to get these kind of interesting, sophisticated results is very much in line with what PixInsight does. PSFs are user computed traditionally as either an average of, stars in an image or a geometric function, mathematical geometry that you specify. Whereas with BlurXTerminator, they're kind of automatically derived by this neural net training within these sampled regions across the image plane. So this next item is one that I really think is interesting. With BlurXTerminator, we have just basically 3 sliders, but in a traditional deconvolution kind of methodology, you need to mitigate artifacts by providing additional information. In the case of PixInsight, this usually requires a local support image, perhaps deringing parameters. You might have to make masks, so you're only applying deconvolution in certain areas, high signal areas compared to other areas. This is kind of all built into BlurXTerminator, an understanding of where the noise is, what PSFs are, what stars are, what are not stars. All of that is by design kind of understood, if you will, within BlurXTerminator. So you don't have quite as many steps to kind of make that work for you. No correction of the variations of distorted PSFs within the traditional ways of utilizing a deconvolution algorithm. You can have a distorted PSF, as I demonstrated before. Perhaps it's smeared like guiding, where all the stars are smeared in the same way. Traditional deconvolution can handle that. But what BlurXTerminator does is it can look at distortions anywhere in the image, even if they're changing, and that comes into play with various kinds of optical aberrations, where you might have coma at the edges of a frame, or other kinds of chromatic problems. This is something that a traditional deconvolution operation just doesn't really handle very well. As I'll be demonstrating very shortly, we have this distinction of star sharpening and non-stellar sharpening. This is something obviously that doesn't happen in a traditional deconvolution where you iteratively sharpen everything everywhere. The PSF functions, if you will, are associated with every single point in the image, whether it be a galaxy or star or something like that. The noise floor is, this is the thing that really excites me. It's again kind of built into this understanding that BlurXTerminator has by being trained by lots and lots of data, whereas traditional deconvolution, you have to do some extra steps like regularization or dampening, which is what some other deconvolution programs have done previously. You dampen the effects once you get closer and closer to the noise floor. And this seems to happen much more naturally as it is implemented in BlurXTerminator. It's agnostic to traditional methods are agnostic to star halos. It doesn't know anything about star halos, where obviously BlurXTerminator does. And and this is another big one, most traditional deconvolution algorithms, they do not like when you have jump discontinuities, when you have saturated PSFs that are clipped. Just don't like that, because they don't look anything like what an expected PSF should basically look like. Whereas BlurXTerminator kind of understands that again. It handles these clipped things because it's seen them before. It's trained to understand that mountains can be chopped off at the top or look weird or whatever it is. And it does something rational as far as the sharpening of those stars in those situations. So that, I think, is a good overall comparison of what is going on. And it really speaks to, again, context of how to think about utilizing BlurXTerminator with your own images. Here's the example of the harder thing, where I take a data set and I process it twice. Where the first time I do the standard workflow, this is actually the workflow that I demonstrate. This very image, this data, is part of one of my videos on my site, where I go step by step and show everything that I would normally do. This I did before BlurXTerminator was available to me. So I did the normal deconvolution, and I did all the other things. By the way, this image is a little special because it's an LRGB image, so the luminance data is real separate data taken from the RGB. that requires a little extra thought. In addition to that, this also has an enhancement in the H-alpha. There's H-alpha data blended in here as well. That's all part of my tutorial. The cool thing, of course, about PixInsight is that you can look at the History Explorer, and all of that processing is recorded here. It's memorialized there. So it's not difficult for me to go through those same steps and roughly, if not, in fact, I did it basically the exact same applications of those processes, with the exception, in this case, of the deconvolution. Because I was working with this luminance information, let me just show it to you. Here's the luminance information. Let me show you the before. This is what it looks like, the integrated image. And then I do sharpening as well as one application here of the HDRMT to make that nucleus a little bit easier to deal with. So this is very standard stuff, and you can see if you zoom in here, you will see some modest sharpening of these features using the typical deconvolution, capabilities within the standard or traditional method. Now here is that same image. Let me align the two again. But with the application of a BlurXTerminator, you can push things, I think, a little bit further without getting as many kind of artifacts. So if I go forward here, this is the application of BlurXTerminator on the luminance. Here is what we have. It's a difference here, but it's slightly different processed, I guess. But you can see the difference between the two images in terms of that kind of resolution due to the further pushing that I was able to do. So let me put these away and now show you effectively what is nearly a final result after I've done everything. It's not quite everything, but it's very, very close to many of the things that I did in this workflow. Here's kind of that final pretty result that I was able to get when I did the standard workflow. And then if I blink the newer BlurXTerminated version, you'll be able to see that there's a difference. There we go. So here is without BlurXTerminator. Now I push things pretty hard here, but you can see some of the lovely benefits of BlurXTerminator in terms of being able to visualize or really see some of those dust lanes, the H2 regions, and other elements really become much more distinct in the galaxy. I love, for example, what happens over in the companion galaxy to some of the dust lanes that are evident there. If we zoom in a little bit more, you can blink. Let's make these similar to one another here. We can blink and show some of the differences. Now in the recording, these differences may or may not come across as well as you might like. So I would encourage you, of course, you have to do this with your own or become a member of my site. You will get exactly the same data and you can do the same kind of operation. But this is the true intrinsic scale. I was showing you a moment ago, zoomed in 200%, which doesn't look terrible. I mean, it's not bad at 200%. At 100%, it looks pretty good. And anything less than that, of course, is going to be fine. But processing an image so that it looks good at 100% or better is really now something that is, at least for me so far in my experience with this, easier for me to do. Because I can push things and still get kind of the result that I was going for. The final version that I ended up with as part of my video on my site is actually this one. So I can blink the two and you can see some of the changes that I made from this version, which is what I just showed you, that identical path, but then I made some final adjustments that I think made the image just a little more compelling the way that I like to see M51. Another thing that interests me in experimenting with BlurXTerminator is to see what these star correction effects are like. And so I have, for example, some wide field imaging taken with an astrograph, and because the field of view is so large, the edges certainly are distorted. There's distortion towards the corners of these frames, and that distortion is radial, though it is much more apparent the further out you get. So when we look at an image like this is one of the corners of this particular field, top left basic corner. And then when you run BlurXTerminator on this, these stars are basically already, look, I'm zoomed in 400%. If you look at the 100% version of it, I mean, they're very, very small to begin with, right? but you zoom in back to 400%, you can see that there are these aberrations where they're much more round in the middle. So now let's look at what happens when you run BlurXTerminator. Let me go ahead and match these two so you can see the difference. So now you can see what happens to stars here. They become more round, nicer. I mean, I would be much happier with this, this star here compared to this one over here. If you want to blink the two, you can do that, and we can just blink back and forth and kind of see that corrective effect. Now again, because this is basically undersampled data, we're not going to achieve smaller than this. This is as small as it gets as far as the sizes of stars and things like that. But we can go anywhere we want in the image. You'll see that the distortions over here on the top right are also fixed, and then we go to the bottom right. Really cool stuff. And this is something that in a traditional kind of algorithm, you just don't get these huge benefits. Now these stars are looking a little funkier over here. They look like little triangles. They still got a little bit of a triangle shape, but I really like the fact that the elongated shapes, especially up here, where we had the much more elongated versions of things, those really get kind of cleaned up. And one of the benefits I think for this is that it's nice to be able to do wide field imaging, where it's often, again, common that you would have distortion effects with stars. And it might be that it's hard to get a good seam if you're doing a mosaic of images, not because the alignment's good and gradients, that's their own problems, but then the shapes of the stars themselves. You have to determine how to blend those two images together, because if the star shapes, though they may be registered, are not the same, you get these weird effects. So I think that BlurXTerminator, now I haven't demonstrated this because it's so brand new, but could very well be beneficial in the production of mosaics, just because you can correctively take care of stars near the edges of frames. One more comment on this data, something else that I kind of found interesting, is that here again we have BlurXTerminator, something more towards the middle of the frame. I'm going to blink the two so you can see the difference between these two frames. Here's before and after. So we're not so worried about the correction. You do get a modest, difference in terms of the size of the stars, which is nice. But here's the part that interests me. One of the things that I find is that I've tried to use Drizzle for purposes of trying to improve the sharpness, not just to take care of, interpolation artifacts and things like that, but literally Drizzle in terms of this spatial improvement mechanism for images. I've never really been able to achieve that. And drizzling takes it's a large overhead, an awful lot of computational time to do, right? So I'm looking at these two results, and this result here, if we zoom in a little bit more, it gives me basically what I've always kind of wanted for a drizzled-like result. Let me align these two. But I don't have to spend the hours to do that. Now that is certainly not the intended effect for, BlurXTerminator, but I like the option. If there is data where I can do something and get this kind of result without having to drizzle it, that's neat. That's a nice tool to have. This section is going to touch on some of the limits of sharpening. The first kind of limitation is when the parameter space, the parameters that you use in your deconvolution algorithm or tool, don't really match up with the data. You can get results that are undesirable. I'm going to demonstrate kind of what that looks like with BlurXTerminator. And in addition, of course, there is an ultimate limit to how much you can sharpen. Again, it's really dependent on how much information useful information you really have in your image. So let's say we have the Crab Nebula data. This is hydrogen alpha data of M1. Beautiful data, actually. And we want to sharpen it a little bit. We want to make it a little bit sharper. So we approach the tool in the normal way, where I have the non-stellar adjustments, and that's the Crab Nebula, the nebula part of this image. That's the part that I really am interested in controlling. And let's just say, we just go full bore with it. We leave it at its default of 0.9. In terms of stars, though, if I look at the stars here, we don't really need much sharpening in terms of these stars. In the hydrogen alpha data, they're very smallish anyway. So I'll just leave that at the default, and I don't need to adjust the halos of the stars. There really are no halos to worry about. So this kind of setup, the default setup, might seemingly be the way to go. I'm going to go ahead and apply it to the image and give it a moment. And this is the result that we get. Now let me do an undo and a redo. Now it might make you say, wow, it is kind of incredible. Let's zoom in here and look at this. We'll look at an undo and a redo. One of the things that happens when you overdo it, it's hard to express, and different deconvolution schemes kind of lead to different appearances or looks. You know, there's the Lucy Richardson algorithm, there's also other algorithms, whatever algorithms. They all have a different kind of appearance and look to them when you over-sharpen. BlurXTerminator has its own look, if you will. One of the things that I've seen when over-sharpening is it kind of connects things. That's typical of deconvolution algorithms. Instead of increasing kind of the separation of small features, they all get kind of connected to one another. And those connections make these worm-like, weird kind of things going on. It's not to say that everything gets that appearance, but many, many things do. And that's something like what we're seeing here. This is an indication that there's an over-sharpening, a too aggressiveness going on here. Now the reason for that could be the following. As BlurXTerminator goes through the image, it's dividing up the image into small areas where it searches for stars. And the stars, again, these point spread functions inform the tool how to do its job. But there's large areas, especially in an image like this, where there are very few stars, and that starting point for the point spread function of what it thinks should be applied there can be a mismatch and result in an over-sharpening. That's kind of what we're seeing here. So the way to control it is to adjust manually this automatic PSF. So if it's not giving us the result that we want, now we can lower the sharpening amount here. That is certainly going to help. But for a given sharpening amount, we can control the degree to which that might happen if it's being caused by the fact that there isn't as much information as necessary to give us a more reasonable result. Now in these areas, I actually don't know what the measurement of the PSF, what the tool actually picked. That might be nice to know, and in the future there might be a way to divine that information. So in other words, I can start picking a number here and experimenting with the results that I get. I kind of did that. One of the things that I did is I produced this image here that again is kind of that similar result, too large. But what I did is I did a manual result to show, if I look here at the initial conditions, I can set up the tool with what I actually used. So I'm going back to the history, double-clicking on BlurXTerminator. So these are the settings that I used to give me this result here. And it's very similar to the result I just obtained. So it was using basically a very large PSF diameter value. Now the stars in this image, however, are very small. The stars are on the order, if you make a measurement of these PSF values, of the diameter, the full width half max, you know, they might only be 3 or 4 pixels at most. So probably a much more appropriate level would be something along the line of 3 or 4, so maybe we'll do like 3.5. I'll come back here to the original image, and let's say we have 3.5 still with a very large sharpening amount. We'll apply it now, and you can see the result is a little bit better. Let me go ahead and show this as well as the large result that's right behind it. So you can see the difference between the two. Let's make sure I am aligning these two images. It gets a little confusing. One moment. Let's align these images so that I can blink them. So here, that's too large compared to here, which is looking more normal, right, but sharpened. So I might do the following last thing, which is, of course, to not quite go quite as much, right? And then we come over here. I would reapply this. Let's see what we get. And now we get a result that looks something like this. And that is pretty cool. Of course, to gain an understanding of the second part of the equation, we would want to compare, and I'm curious about, I don't remember what settings I originally did here with this example. Let me see. Well, they're pretty similar. What we would want to do is actually compare what we're seeing in this image to an image that faithfully records without deconvolution what these structures look like. There isn't a very good Earth-based image I can use. This data that I took, the original data, is pretty good. It's on the order of about an arc-second or so as far as the seeing in the ultimate integrated result is concerned. It's amazing. And then we're sharpening on top of that. So sub-arc-second details is what we need to see. I literally have to get an HST image in order to kind of make an interesting comparison. And then we can see where the details start to kind of fall apart a little bit. So I'm going to pick some part of this image. Let me remove the, delete. I'll pick the region, I don't know, down here. This is where we have all this interesting structure in the bottom left, and here's the HST image. We can go to that same region here, find the same stars. Now, with this data, we need to be careful about how we look at it. This data actually doesn't record hydrogen alpha. It records the sulfur and oxygen, but not HA. So the sulfur is going to follow very closely to what we're recording in my image with the H alpha here. So let's try to find, let me zoom out here and try to find the similar structures. So I think you'll agree with me that if I zoom out here, this wall right here is the same as this wall right there. So if we zoom in to these images and then we go from that wall, we can probably find wherever it is we'd like to find. I'd like to see some of these small features right there. So I'm going to move this over. And you'll see that we have this little finger pointing over there. That's the same thing as this finger right here. Now notice I'm at 300%. This isn't even the the intrinsic resolution of HST data, right? But roughly we're at similar scales here. So you can see that there is obviously structure that goes well beyond what is just recorded in this data. And if you look around at stuff, you'll see errors, because deconvolution is only going to approximate, based on the data, what the reality is in some sense. We can only reconstruct so much. So for example, you'll find that we have a feature like here, right? This is a fairly bright feature, and it obviously, deals with this feature right here. But you'll find that there's a significant mismatch actually between those two features in this data. Just look over here, for example, at this star, and then look at the feature that is here. There is a feature there, but to the degree that it matches exactly, it's difficult. Now again, I'm zoomed in 300%. If you're zoomed out, we just see that there is some linear feature there, which would be represented in the the HST data. But this is the scale at which you need to really start looking to start to see kind of this breakdown of this information. When you look at this kind of scale, it's very difficult to perceive those very, very small errors in approximation of what's this reconstruction, if you will. And so you can have some degree of confidence that when we look at this, at even a full resolution, a lot of the very small features that we see by eye are features that are representative in the original data. So finally, if I take the image in its original form, and then we can blink the two at the intrinsic resolution, these features that we're seeing here are really quite good in terms of the overall structures and things that we're doing, but you really got to zoom in to see some of the differences. And there's also some differences that you'll see in the overall illumination, and that deals again because of this reconstruction of the PSF and trying to approximate the answers. But still pretty good stuff. I can see this thing, I can see the little finger there. All of that stuff really starts to pop out when you use a tool like BlurXTerminator. BlurXTerminator has some options at the bottom, There's correct only, correct first, and non-stellar, then stellar. So these are like preset convenience functions. For example, when you use correct only, it does no sharpening. It sets these sliders to 0 for sharpening stars and non-stellar stuff. And it's just going to modify the PSFs and kind of circularize them throughout the image, getting rid of any of the distortions that it finds. Let me just show you what that looks like. If I take a step back here, well, these are the original stars. It's terrible. And I had employed some sharpening originally here. But now if I just do correct only, we're going to see no sharpening occur, but it'll circularize. The image is taking care of this aberration, which is just amazing. By the way, if you watch my processing time here, you can see how quickly it goes. It takes maybe 20 or 30 seconds to do. And that's because I'm using the GPU capability of my machine. So here you can see it's just been corrected in this case. Now the other options are to correct first, where you're going to make that correction and then follow it by sharpening. I haven't had enough images in order to see when that is entirely necessary, so I don't have examples for every situation. But I guess the idea is that if you correct the stars first and then do the sharpening, this can be a better, give you a better result in certain cases. And then this one is one that does interest me even more, where you're going to sharpen the non-stellar stuff first and then the stars. That could be important where you have embedded stars. Again, I don't have a very good image that demonstrates that, but I do know exactly where this is going. I know, for example, I bet you that in an object like NGC 604, which is the large H2 region in M33, where you have lots of little stars embedded in the H2 region, and that whole thing is kind of relatively small. But if you want to make that work well, I suspect that if you did the non-stellar first and then the stellar, it might handle doing the sharpening of that particular region of the galaxy. The last image I'd like to show is really special to me because I just feel lucky. It's serendipity that I had this data at a time that BlurXTerminator kind of became available to me. I don't know what I was going to do with this data. I've had it for a little while now, and I just couldn't figure out what to do. And then suddenly, now there's this new tool that really does tackle exactly the situation that I have. So let me show you what I mean. Here is the image of some beautiful galaxies. I acquired this data by paying for some time on a telescope in Chile. And it was not cheap, but as you can guess, in astronomy, if I show the full resolution here, what can you do? The atmosphere is just such that, oh my goodness, it's kind of fuzzy. It's just not the best possible conditions that you would hope for. But I invested an awful lot of time, many, many hours. There are nearly 10 hours or so, maybe it was 8. I don't remember what I paid for here, but a lot of hours worth of time to collect just the luminance. And then, of course, there's the color data as well. But a traditional kind of deconvolution routine, it's just really tough to handle, especially the very bright stars there. It's really, really tough to handle them. But this is really in the realm of what BlurXTerminator can handle. So let's look at what BlurXTerminator did, and then I'm going to show you the actual settings that I used. So here we can compare these two images. Maybe let's center this a little bit better. So this is going to be the before, and these are wonderful galaxies. One of the galaxies is NGC 6770. So if we blink the two frames, boy, you can see a marked difference. I mean, this goes from here to something like what was a much, much better night by comparison. The actual resolution is here. So this is the true image scale from a 1 meter telescope of these galaxies. Now this region, the square that we're looking at here, I don't think is any larger than 3 arc minutes. It might only be, maybe 3 or 4 arc minutes here. So that's the difference that we can realize with BlurXTerminator. Now, let's look at the actual settings that I used. If we come to our History Explorer and I double click on the initial state, I can load the tool, and here you can see what I did. I went for maximum sharpening of stars. It needed it. Oh my goodness. I also decreased the halos a little bit, right? because the halos are fuzzy and I wanted to make the stars have a little bit more of a defined edge to them. And then the sharpening of the non-stellar stuff, which is basically the galaxy stuff, I didn't go full amount, right? I just did what I thought was necessary. If you do more than this, it starts to look like that, that connectedness look, and it doesn't look very good. So I think that I hit a good mark here with regards to the luminance image. Now I also have some color data as well. Let me go ahead and show you what that looks like. Here, by the way, is an adjustment that I made. It wasn't so much that it was a sharpening, but I also need to take care of the brightness of the inner parts of these galaxies. And so I did apply a small amount of HDMRT to the galaxies, to the image as a whole, and then applied the sharpening. That did help me in this respect to kind of clean that up. So that's what we're going to see here. This is without HDRMT applied to the color data itself. Let's align these two, and we can blink them. Here's the color data basically before. I think I raised the color saturation here just so we could see some of the colors of the galaxy. And the RGB, so very little processing has happened here. And then the RGB after the sharpening. And I do believe that I did apply another one of Russ's cool tools, which is the noise exterminator, to help with the noise of the image. But the combination now of this kind of RGB image plus the sharpened luminance, you do all of the math and all of the manipulation that's necessary to put that together as an LRGB image, do more processing, and that results in the final image that I'd like to show you. I haven't shown it to anyone yet because it's the first time that I've had a chance to do so. So here it is, the final result. As you can see, I've rotated the image to make it horizontal, at least one of those companion galaxies. I kind of like this view. And if we zoom in 100%, such as this, you can really start to see some of the details of these galaxies. I would not have been able to do this were it not for the capabilities of BlurXTerminator. That's what makes it so exciting. This data was really taken under poor seeing, certainly considering the place from which it was observed. And these galaxies are so tiny. So to do this really made my investment in money and time for this set of galaxies really worthwhile. And I'm so thankful and excited to now have a tool such as BlurXTerminator to take advantage of and open more possibilities in processing for me. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please again comment below and let me know what you think. Consider joining Atom Block Studios. And I might even leave here with showing a few of these final versions of the images that were parts of these demonstrations. Again, thank you so much for watching this video.